Once upon a time, in a town where firewood smoke rose before the cock crowed, where old women still swept their compounds with brooms made from palm fronds, and where stew was stirred with love, sorrow, and secrets, there lived a woman named Ajoke. She was not a woman you could ignore. Iyalode Ajoke Adaremi was large, proud, and beautifully scarred. 4 thick tribal marks ran across each of her cheeks like rivers carved by history. Her wrapper never stopped moving, whether she was bending to stir a pot or raising her arms to bless the head of a hungry child. And her eyes? They held stories, deep stories. Stories of joy, stories of pain, stories too heavy to be spoken aloud. Ajoke's kitchen wasn't the biggest in Adaremi. It didn't have a tiled floor or painted walls. It was nothing more than a wooden stall beside a big almond tree on Ajose Street, with 3 low benches, a rusted zinc roof, and 2 blackened pots that never went cold. But her food? Her food could quiet the tongue of a gossip. It could bring peace to a fighting couple. It could make a grieving man close his eyes and forget the world for 3 blessed minutes. No one cooked like Ajoke. She didn't just feed people, she healed them. She fed students, laborers, mechanics, nurses, traders, and barren women who believed the spice in her jollof rice could open their womb, and she never turned anyone away. If you had money, good. If you didn't, she'd still give you food, and say, return it with kindness, not cash. She was widowed early and raised her 2 daughters alone. They were now schooling in Lagos, living with her late husband's cousin. She had no sons, no siblings nearby, and no one to call her dear anymore. But the town was her family. And yet, they watched it happen. They watched the day her pot brought too many customers. They watched as other market women whispered behind her back. They watched when Madame Tinuola, the rich food vendor with glossy signs and loud music, called her a witch behind her stall. They laughed when the town chairman gave Ajoke a food contract instead of Madame Tinuola. And they remained silent the day her name was scratched off the beneficiary list of women who were supposed to receive government support. Because when a woman becomes too loved, she becomes too dangerous. But Ajoke kept cooking, even on the day she noticed her water drum was suddenly leaking. Even when market women stopped answering her greetings, even when flies began swarming only around her stall, even though she swept with bitter leaves every morning, even when the wind whispered her name wrong, she knew what was happening, but she kept cooking. Because Ajoke was not just feeding mouths, she was fighting silence with soup. She was offering peace in every spoon. And when she stirred her pot with that long iron spoon, she whispered her own prayers into it. Prayers that God would remember her, that her children would not suffer, and that her name would never be used as a warning. But heaven was quiet, and evil was already knocking. It was a Tuesday, the second market day of the month, and the town square of Adaremi was thick with noise and negotiation. Traders poured in from neighboring villages to display their goods, buyers swarmed in, and drums echoed faintly from the palace courtyard where the king's men were celebrating a naming ceremony. Ajoke had arrived earlier than usual that day. By 5 a.m., her firewood was already crackling. By 6:30, the smell of her fried pepper and onion had covered half the street. And by 7:15, there was a line. It stretched from her almond tree to the palm wine cellar across the road. 3 women carried bowls of iba to her. A young teacher begged her to keep fish for break time. A pregnant woman came crying. She had no appetite, but Ajoke's okra was the only thing her body accepted. Ajoke didn't speak much that morning. She just scooped, smiled, nodded, and pressed her hand briefly on each person's bowl, as though blessing it before it left her stall. Across the street, Madame Tinuola watched everything. Her own canopy sat nearly empty. Her girls were yawning. Her industrial cooler was full of untouched jollof. And her shiny spoon, the one she loved to wave like a flag of pride, rested motionless. By 10 a.m., Madame Tinuola had had enough. She stood, adjusted her gold-colored wrapper, and whistled, a sharp, shrill whistle, like the kind used to summon dogs in the back streets of Lagos. 4 women left their stalls and followed her. They walked behind her like shadows until they disappeared into the back of her shop, the closed section with the tinted glass and rotating fan. That afternoon, as the market thinned, a whisper began to spread. Ajoke is using charm. They said her pot was not just black from firewood, it was black from secrets. They said no woman's stew could make a child stop crying unless something spiritual was inside. They said a woman once licked her spoon and had twins the next year, even though she had been barren for 11 years. They said she was collecting people's destinies and cooking it with her cow meat. And the worst? They said she had visited a native woman in Oj who gave her something to bury under her cooking stall. That evening, the women gathered again, this time at Mama Bisola's backyard, just behind the cocoa shed. There were 7 of them: Tinuola, Mama Felicia, Iarisi, Iwatomi Lola, Shady, Alhaja Toyin, and Mama Yamisi, the woman who sold onions beside Ajoke's stall but always pretended to smile. They didn't sit like gossipers. They sat like a council of judges, and the trial was simple. Ajoke must be removed. She's turning people's eyes away from our stalls, Tinuola hissed. The chairman calls her for every food contract now. Even the palace asked for her amala during the last festival. She has no husband, oh, Mama Risi added, fanning herself with her wrapper. A woman with no man and no helper shouldn't be that successful. Something is not clean. And that woman prays too much while cooking, Alhaja Toyin spat. Even Islamic stew must not have that kind of power. The women sat and planned. Their voices low, but their hearts sharp. Their souls too wounded by her rising light to remember that this woman had once fed their own children. By the next week, Ajoke's cooking water began to go missing. Her firewood began to break for no reason. Salt turned to sand in her pots. Her soup spoiled before noon. Her most loyal customer, the teacher from the school, fell ill after eating her food and accused her of poisoning her. But Ajoke said nothing. She cleaned her stall, she prayed aloud, and she kept cooking. Even when the children no longer ran to her stall first. Even when she overheard someone say, "Let's just avoid her, you know what they're saying." Even when her fingers began to sting while stirring her pot, as if the fire itself had turned against her. Ajoke kept cooking, but the fire behind her eyes, it had begun to dim. And that was exactly what they wanted. The morning started like any other. The air smelled of damp charcoal and market sweat. The clatter of trays, the squawk of stubborn hens, and the melody of hawkers singing their prices rose like an anthem across the open square. But Ajoke felt something different in her bones that day. She stood behind her pot, but her hands shook slightly as she sprinkled dried pepper into the bubbling stew. The meat inside didn't dance like it usually did. The aroma was sharp, too sharp, like something had shifted. She dipped a spoon into the pot and tasted it. Her face twisted. The stew was bitter. She blinked in confusion, stirred again, tasted again. Still bitter. She reached for her salt jar and opened the lid. What greeted her was not salt, but ash, cold, flaky, and gray. Her stomach dropped. Ajoke's heart began to pound like a talking drum. She looked around her stall. Everything looked the same, but everything felt wrong. The almond tree wasn't rustling. The wind wasn't blowing. Even the flies that normally hovered at the edge of her pot seemed to have disappeared. She stepped outside the stall to breathe, and that's when she saw her. Standing across the road, barefoot, wrapped in a pure white wrapper, with a scarf tied loosely over her head. An old woman, cast-dark-skinned, tall, her back slightly bent, but her eyes were open wide, eyes that did not blink. She stood perfectly still, in the middle of the crowd, just pointing. Then she turned, walked into the crowd, and vanished. That same afternoon, while Ajoke sat on the floor of her kitchen trying to scrub the black mark on her pot that refused to fade, her neighbor Mama Yemisi walked past without a single greeting. Ajoke stood. "Mama Yemisi," she called out, You didn't see me today?" The woman hissed loudly, turned around and snapped. "So you're still talking to people, Abi? After everything that's going on in this market? You better carry your charm away from here before it's too late." Ajoka dropped her sponge. She walked out, her hands wet with soot, her wrapper dragging behind her. She was shaking. "Charm?" she repeated, voice rising. "You think I'm still here because of charm?" Mama Yemisi folded her arms. "People are falling sick after eating from your stall, children vomited, your own stew smells like poison. You think we don't know?" Ajoka's eyes burned. "You think I've worked this hard, loved this much, and fed this town every single day for 10 years, so that you'll accuse me of juju? You people are the ones with secrets," she said, pointing at the growing circle of women gathering to listen. "You know I'm clean. You know I've never taken from any of you. You know I've never even raised my voice, but it is my own food that's suddenly too sweet for you to understand." She turned in a slow circle. "Then let the ground swallow me today if I've used anything but pepper and prayer in my stew." Her voice cracked. "Yet swallow me now." But the ground didn't move. The women stared at her with faces hard as yam peels. Only one woman, a younger trader named Bisola, who once ate from Ajoka's pot while in labor, blinked away a tear. But she said nothing. She just lowered her eyes and walked away. Ajoka could not sleep. The taste of bitterness still danced on her tongue. Her pot refused to boil properly. Her firewood turned damp. Her eyes burned. She dreamt of the woman in white, standing at the foot of her bed, pouring water from her pot onto the floor. The water turned to blood. When she woke up, her wrapper was soaked with sweat. She prayed, but even her prayers sounded like echoes. The next day, Ajoka opened her pot and found shredded calabash in the middle of her stew, something she had not put there, something she could not explain. She screamed. People came running. She was crying, shouting that someone had entered her stall overnight, that someone had done something to her food. But the onlookers just stared. Some shook their heads. One man muttered, "She's losing her mind." A few children began calling her Mad Mama Stew behind her back. Then came the final blow. 3 thugs arrived at the market later that week, pretending to be sanitation officials. They had badges, polished boots, and they walked straight to Ajoka's stall with plastic bags. They dumped her coolers on the floor, searched her buckets, flung her bag of dry pepper into the sand. And one of them lifted her pot and shouted, "What's this wrapped in nylon at the bottom?" Ajoka ran forward. "Don't touch that! It's my dry locust bean, wrapped from yesterday!" But they weren't listening. One of them pulled out the wrapped item and screamed, "Charm! Oga, this one is juju!" Ajoka screamed louder, "That's Iru! It's just Iru!" But the crowd had already started murmuring. Phones came out. A woman screamed, "Ewu! She's been feeding us jazz!" Ajoka tried to explain, but her voice was drowned by judgment. The market elders came. The case was heard, and without investigation, without pity, she was banned from cooking at the market indefinitely. Her stall was demolished the same day. Her pot rolled into the gutter. And no one, not one, stood up to defend her. Not the women she'd fed for free, not the mother whose twins were born on her food, not even the church elder whose soup she once paid for when his wife was sick. She went home that day, silent. The days after, Ajoka was banned from the market felt like mourning in slow motion. Her daughters in Lagos hadn't heard the full story. She didn't tell them. She only said, "Pray for me," and changed the topic. But those who lived in Adaremi could see her. The once bold woman with tribal marks that danced when she laughed now walked like her wrapper was filled with stones. She still cooked, behind her house this time. Under a crooked canopy her neighbors helped her nail together. But something had left her eyes. The pot still boiled, the stew still simmered, but the joy was gone. And the town? The town looked away. Except for one man, Baba Dada, the man who sold firewood near the mechanic's shed. He was old, half-blind, and always chewing bitter cola. He came to her stall one afternoon and dropped a bundle of firewood beside her. "Take. No pay." Ajoke looked up in surprise. "Baba?" But he was already walking away. That night, as she tried to light the fire, the wood refused to burn. She struck the match again, and again, and again. Nothing. The smoke choked her. The kerosene tin spilled, and her hand shook so hard she dropped her spoon. That was the first time she cried since the market turned against her. Not quiet crying, deep, body-breaking sobs. She bent over her empty pot, weeping into the same hands that once fed a town. The next morning, as the sun rose timidly behind the bread seller's fence, Shady came. Shady was one of the 7 women from the council that plotted against her, the youngest of them. She sold tomatoes beside the corn cellar. Slim, always pretending to smile, always licking her fingers. She came with an offering, a bag of rice, and a fake apology. "Ajoke, I heard what happened. Some of the women went too far. Maybe we can talk to the elders again." Ajoke stared at her, long and hard. Then, with a voice that cracked from pain, she said, "Tell them I forgive them." Shada blinked. "You do?" Ajoke nodded. "Yes, but tell them this too. I fed this town with love, and you all spat in the pot." She paused. "When your own hunger comes, may your tongues remember me." Shady left quickly, and never came back. 2 days later, a young boy ran to her stall. He was panting. "Auntie Ajoke, I hear say dem dey plan something for you again." Ajoke looked up from her stew. "Who's planning what?" "I know Sabi, but I overheard Alhaja Toyin talking to Mama Risi near the shrine. They said you won't last till next week." Ajoke forced a smile. "Thank you, my child." She gave him a spoonful of stew and sent him away. But that night, she didn't sleep. She folded her wrapper, packed her pot, and sat in front of her house with a lantern, waiting. The wind howled. The next night, a Wednesday, Ajoke stayed up late. She had just finished cleaning her pot, humming an old song her grandmother used to sing when the yam was too soft. The moon was full. The town was quiet. Then she heard it, a shuffle, a whisper, a crack. She moved to the window, peeking through the torn curtain. 3 figures, moving in the dark just past her backyard. She froze. A minute passed, then another, then the smell. Kerosene. Then came the sound, a glass bottle smashing. Then, the light. Fire. Ajoke screamed. She ran to grab a bucket, flung water, screamed again, but the fire was spreading fast. It caught the edge of her shed, leapt to the oil drum beside her, and exploded into a cloud of smoke and flame. She screamed again, louder this time. "Help me! Somebody help me! Please!" But the street was silent. No one came out. Not the woman who lived across. Not the man she helped pay hospital bills for. Not even the one whose wedding she cooked for free. Ajoke tried to run through the back door, but something fell. A burning plank collapsed and trapped her leg. She fell, screamed, dragged herself, and in those final moments, choking in smoke, tears streaming down her face, Ajoke cried, not just from pain, but from betrayal. "You watched me burn. You watched me suffer. I gave this town everything, and you gave me silence." Before her lungs gave out, before the flames swallowed her, before the world closed its ears to her final cry, Ajoke promised one thing. "This town will eat from me again, but this time they will swallow their shame with stew. I gave them love in every spoon. Now I'll give them silence." And then she died, with her eyes open, face burnt, and her once famous tribal marks charred into ash. No one heard those words, but the earth did. 2 months later, in the thick belly of Lagos mainland, behind a banana truck on a dim corner of Okekoto, Agege, something strange happened. A small wooden food stall appeared where there was none before. No one saw who built it. No carpenter remembered measuring the space. But there it was, solid, black. sitting under the same crooked mango tree that had been dead for years. Behind it stood a woman, fat, familiar, beautiful, quiet, smiling. Her tribal marks? Gone. Her eyes? Calm, empty, patient. She wore a wrapper from the 1970s, a scarf tied tight around her head, no jewelry, no perfume, just the same soft voice. "You want rice or swallow?" Nobody in Lagos knew her name. She didn't introduce herself. They simply called her Mama Night Food, because she opened at exactly 7:30 p.m. and disappeared at exactly 10:30 p.m. every single day. No one ever saw her sweeping, no one ever saw her setting up, no firewood, no cooler, no assistant, just her and her pot. And the food? Perfect. Jollof that tasted like memory, stew that tasted like home, meat so soft it fell apart in your mouth. Dispatch riders, bus conductors, factory workers, students, nurses, everyone who ate there kept coming back, always polite, but never laughed. But she wasn't back for fame. She wasn't cooking to make money. Ajoke came back to Lagos for one reason only: to serve stew to the mouths that watched her burn and said nothing. Her rule was simple. If you're innocent, eat and go. If you're guilty, you will eat, and never wake up the same again. And she didn't kill with knife or poison, she killed with memory. When her targets tasted her food, they remembered the screams they ignored. They remembered her burning. They remembered the ash. They remembered the promise. And then, they faded. Quietly, mysteriously, one by one. The first man was Ibrahim, a Lagos-based trader from Adaremi. He had been the one paid to deliver firewood the night the women planned the burning. He didn't light the fire, but he knew. He passed by Okikoa one night and smelled something, haunting. He stopped, smelled rice, meter, ate it quickly. By the next morning, he died. Another night, a woman named Moji, who just moved to Lagos from Oyor, came to buy food after closing late from her tailoring shop. She walked up with her friend. The woman behind the pot looked up, paused, then smiled. But something in her eyes stayed fixed too long. Moji left with her food. At home, she looked at the plate and froze. The meat was shaped exactly like the scar her mother had on her leg, a burn mark she got the night Ajoka's stall went up in flames. Her mother was Mama Risi, one of the original market women who plotted Ajoka's downfall. Moji hadn't known, but the stew tasted angry. By morning, she was gone, missing, phone off, room empty, plate still on the table. A month passed. People kept eating. No one questioned her face because she had no tribal marks. But once in a while, someone from Oyo would pause mid-chew and say, "This woman reminds me of someone," then shake their head. "No, can't be. That one died and she had marks. This one's face is clean." They would eat again and forget. But those who were guilty, their bones remembered. Their dreams betrayed them. And Lagos became Ajoke's pot. One of Ajoke's daughters, Simi, 22, soft-spoken, first-year student at a polytechnic in Lagos. She had come down from school one evening, walking from the bus stop through Oka Koto with her hostel friend, looking for decent night food. And then she saw her. A fat, round-faced woman in a faded wrapper standing calmly beside a steaming pot. The woman looked up. Their eyes met. She smiled gently. "Rice or swallow?" she asked. But Simi's body froze. Her friend kept walking, but Simi stood still, staring. Her spirit screamed. "Mummy!" Because her mind fought it. This woman had no tribal marks. Her face, younger, calmer, still the shape of her nose, her hands, her smile. It was her mother. But her mother, Ajoke, died in a fire some years ago, right? She didn't eat that night. She walked away shaking. But her dreams, for the next 7 nights, were of a pot, burning in silence. Meanwhile, far away in Adaremi, 7 women were preparing for a Lagos wedding. Their former market leader's daughter was marrying a commissioner's son. The location? Ogba, Lagos. They pooled money to hire a private driver, Mr. Fatai, to take them to and from Lagos. They wore matching lace. They sang old songs on the road. They laughed. No one remembered what they did to Ajoke. No one, except the ground beneath them. After the wedding, the driver's car broke down near Okekoto. The sun was already falling. He tried and tried. Nothing. By 8:15 p.m., the women began complaining, tired, hungry, irritated. Then one of them said, "I smell pepper stew." They looked around and saw the stall. Simple, small, lit by one dim bulb. A fat woman smiled at them. "Good evening. Come, I just finished cooking." One of the women, Mama Layo, squinted. "Ah, this woman looks like—" "No, Ajoke had tribal marks," another said quickly. "And she died, burnt." They shrugged and approached. They ordered rice, amala, ewedu. She served them one by one, smiling calmly, her eyes sharp and deep like still water. They sat and ate, muttering about how the food tasted exactly like Ajoke's food. One of them, Mama Yetunde, paused and whispered, "Wait, did she just smile like Ajoke?" But it was too late. By morning, the car was magically fixed. They laughed it off, called it grace, returned to Adaremi. 3 days later, Mama Layoye collapsed while cooking. She kept screaming, "Forgive me, Ajoke. I didn't know the oil would catch fire. I only helped fan the flame." She died with her mouth open and her tongue swollen. 1 week later, Mama Yetunde fell into a strange coma. Doctors found nothing wrong. She never woke up. The remaining 5 women, each, began facing strange misfortunes. One lost her daughter to madness. One walked into traffic screaming, "She came back!" One drank water and couldn't swallow again. One began smelling like smoke. One burned her own house by mistake. All within 40 days of eating from that pot. Now afraid, Mr. Fatai, the driver, who overheard some of the women's confessions before they died, went to the local chief in Adaremi. He told them, "They said the food tasted like Ajoke's. They said the woman smiled like her. And I remember clearly, she looked me in the eye like she knew me. But she had no tribal marks." The elders held an emergency meeting. They decided to send 3 trusted sons of Adaremi back to Lagos to confirm. The 3 men, Tayo, Seifiu, and Bamadele, arrived in Lagos and found the stall easily. They came separately, pretending to be strangers. They sat. They ordered food. The woman smiled, served them, and hummed a song none of them had heard in years. Ajoke's cooking song. That was when Tayo trembled. He looked up and whispered, "It's her, God. It's her." Suddenly, the bulb above the stall flickered. The wind stopped. The woman looked up and smiled again. Then, she disappeared, right before their eyes. Her pot turned to ashes. The bench they sat on caught cold fire. It burned without heat. They ran. Everyone eating her food that evening ran. Lagos stood still. They returned to Adaremi shaking. The town held a silent mourning, not because they lost the women, but because they buried the truth. Ajoke's daughter, Simi, eventually found her way back to Okekoto weeks later. The stall was no longer there. Just the mango tree, now blooming red flowers, and beneath the tree was a small wooden sign. For the hands that cook with love, and the mouths that forget too quickly. Simi stood still, tears in her eyes. In this life, do not be too quick to bury the truth. Sometimes, the very people we destroy in our jealousy are the ones God sent to help us. Ajoke was not just a cook. She was a blessing in human form, sent to feed her community with dignity, love, and clean hands. But when envy, lies, and hatred blind us, even angels begin to look like threats. And when justice is ignored on earth, sometimes it cooks in the spirit, and it will be served one steaming plate at a time. Let this story remind us all, never laugh when others are rising. Don't destroy what you can't create. And never forget, the mouth that speaks evil will one day eat from the pot it cursed. Thank you so much for watching this powerful African folk tale. If this story gave you goosebumps or reminded you of someone you know, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever heard a story like this before? Do you believe in revenge from beyond the grave? Let's talk in the comments. Drop a "Joke deserved better" if you were touched by her story. Drop "Never let envy win" if you believe jealousy ruins destinies. And don't forget, this is African Tales by Ima Day. We bring you the deepest stories, the realest truths, and the spookiest folktales that stay with you long after the video ends. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next mind-blowing tale. See you in the next video. And remember, not every food is just food. Some carry stories. Some carry spirits. Watch what you eat at night.